The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog and join the Progressive Army. And now, ladies and gentlemen,
you're now about to witness the truth.
It's the Benjamin Dixon Show.
Good evening. Good evening, everyone. I am the guest host for the Benjamin Dixon Show tonight on this lovely December evening. And joining me are my co-hosts, Nicholas Nowlin from the Takedown with Nick, and Katie and Garholt. It's pronounced Garholt. Okay, Katie Garholt from a new show that's going to be joining us on the Progressive Army. What is the name of your show?
Tentatively, the reason we drink or why we drink.
And there are so many reasons to drink in 2016. So many new reasons to drink in 2016. We have a great show planned here tonight. We're going to start by discussing the second election day.
Where the Electoral College voted for who would Electoral College would formally cast their votes for who would be president of the United States of America on yesterday, December 19th. Unsurprisingly, they did not break 35 or so of them did not break ranks, and Donald Trump will be our president, is our president-elect still. So for those people who were unable to come to terms with that on November 8th, hopefully this is the final sort of straw to break that camel's back. Did you guys actually expect for the electors to break ranks?
Not in a million years, no. It's just not the way it works. In fact, I think some states actually have laws that don't allow the electors to break. Don't they? In Maine and I think Massachusetts, perhaps, there are actually laws that prevent people from being a faithless elector. And on top of that, it would be bad politics and it wouldn't work. So I just couldn't imagine. It was such a far-fetched idea to begin with, and people had so many of their hopes and dreams resting on that, and I just thought it was really ill-conceived.
Well, yeah. Okay, so about half of the states in the United States of America have laws on the books that are theoretically meant to prevent faithless electors from breaking ranks and casting their vote for another person other than who won that state's electoral votes. But in most cases, in most of these states, the penalty is incredibly minor, ranging from about $1,000 fine to probation to mostly just fine. So there is no one would go to jail for this. There would just be a very small penalty. And I think one state, it might be Maine, simply strips the electoral of their vote and gives it to someone else. So it wasn't going to happen. It simply wasn't going to happen.
I want to point out something. Let's think about. I agree that it probably wouldn't have happened, but let's think about what would it mean if it did happen. Like, I think it's very important to think about that. So what you would have is somebody who won the election under the rules that the election is currently held under, that will not be allowed to sit based on what? Based on the manufactured opinions of people who lost, right? So, like, what does that mean? Let's say we got a person that we wanted in there and the business community didn't want them. Does that mean they don't get elected because the electors can just overturn that? Are you going to set a precedent where the people who lost the election can still get their guy in because, through whatever mechanism? That's really not how it works. If you're advocating for that, it's a double-edged sword, and it really will come back to bite us in the future. So I don't think that that's something that people should be advocating for at all.
And that's
no matter the consequence.
Well, I think there were two arguments in favor of this, like the faithless elector or Hamilton elector phenomenon. A was that and I think both of them were kind of contradictory. So one argument was a-democratic and the other argument was very democratic. So they kind of just flip-flop on one side. So one side was saying that since she won the popular vote, the Electoral College should be abolished anyway because it's an inherently anti-democratic part of our democracy or republic, of our government. That's a fair point. A point that was made 16 years ago and probably should have been taken seriously then, but a fair point nonetheless. And the other side of that argument was the sort of Hamilton elector part argument who claimed that the Electoral College is meant to prevent from becoming the president of the United States, regardless of Democratic will. So you have two different arguments, both sort of contradicting one another, if that makes sense. But Katie wanted to say something.
I was just going to say that Nick's point as to what would be the downfall that would happen after something like this if it did succeed. I think that's the reason why it would never succeed. I think people do think it would set a really dangerous precedent to have the democratically elected president-elect be overthrown basically by a coup of the Electoral College. I think it would be so immeasurably damaging that I think it would actually be more damaging than 4 years of a Trump presidency. And that's just my opinion. But
yeah, it would almost downgrade us all the way down to like banana republic status, where you can just have a democratically elected president removed and somebody who's never been elected be installed to run the government. Well, we basically turned to Brazil overnight.
Let's talk about the numbers real quick. So we had a grand total of 7 faithless electors during this particular election, 2 from Donald Trump and 5 from Hillary Clinton. 3 of Clinton's electors voted for Colin Powell, 1 for Native American activist Faith Spotted Eagle, and 1 Hawaii elector voted for Bernie Sanders, while 2 of Donald Trump's voted for John Kasich and the other voted for Ron Paul. I think both of those were from Texas. Yes, both from Texas. This was obviously a plan amongst Democrats to get Trump not elected, and in the end, it seems that more Democratic electors flipped the script than Republican electors did. So is that irony? I thought it was worth mentioning. So you were going to say something, Nick?
No, I mean, to me, this is almost a non-story. It literally. Like I read it for a second and I just instantly discarded it as not important. If you want to change the Electoral College, that's fine, but you have to change that before the election. You can't all of a sudden complain about the Electoral College after you've lost, because then you're just a loser complaining about that you lost in.
Especially since right before the election, you had all of the Hillary Clinton surrogates all over the news. Trying to do like a pre-damage control, like, she's going to win, and Trump voters don't have anything to say about it because it's a legitimate election. As you remember, the Trump voters were all trying to kind of delegitimize her win before the election, and Hillary Clinton voters were trying to, say, oh no, it's all legitimate. There's nothing untoward going on here. And then all of a sudden, as soon as Trump won, they did exactly what the Trump voters were threatening to do before the election. So it just revealed itself to be such obvious partisan politicking. It's kind of horrendous, and it backfired badly.
Of course, but this is part of there's 2 points to engage with here. First, this is part of a very wide trend of only having a problem with things once they're to your disadvantage, but not having a problem with them when you are winning because of them. So the same problems that existed in the primary existed during the election. The voter suppression, the machines failing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But when they were benefiting Clinton, it didn't matter. But now that it may have cost her key races, although I don't believe that, it does matter. And the second thing to mention here is that a big popular vote win was part of her strategy. So they took money out of certain places, your Wisconsin, your Michigans, your sort of key battleground states, and flooded that money into cities to win more popular vote. And apparently they forgot how American election is decided, because that's just not how you win.
Well, I think we can't draw too much into like the campaign tactics and what this did and what that did, because in all honesty, without an accurate vote count, which we don't have in America, without a verifiable vote count, which we don't have in America, it's really hard to kind of draw too many conclusions from the actual outcome, right?
But we do have the gist.
All we know, she may very well have won, or she may very well have lost. It's hard to say. But what I will say, though, is the outcome that that is being, basically held up as a legitimate outcome is definitely not the one that they expected.
Oh, definitely. And this was a Hail Mary pass. This was a Hail Mary pass for the people who just can't seem to get over the fact that Trump won the election based on the rules and standards and structure that we have, which, as problematic as people have been shouting about for the past 2 decades or so, people defended up until the point it was to their disadvantage. And 2, I kind of just want us to move on to bigger and better things than trying to prevent this from occurring. For a variety of reasons. The first reason is simply that it's, this is a fool's errand of the entitled mind that would rather change the entire nature of reality and the structure of our democracy and all these things than accept the fact that Clinton lost. And 2, I guess I would feel worse for Clinton's loss. I feel worse for America if the Clinton campaign had some kind of answer to Trumpism, which they didn't. The Clinton campaign had no answer to Trumpism. They had an alternative to Trump, which is not the same thing.
Yeah, I want to point out something, and this is a problem. I'm probably going to speak about it probably on my show next month, but this is a problem I've been having when I speak to, your typical liberal, the person who would support a Hillary Clinton. They speak about Obama and all these great things that he's done and how great his presidency has been. And I say, well, under his watch, Democrats have lost, 900 seats across the country. State elected officials, local elected officials, county elected officials, all across the board. They lost like all over the place. And then it culminated into Donald Trump becoming the presidency at the end. So they lost all that. The party is greatly diminished. Yet somehow Barack Obama and the Democratic brand is strong and it's great and it's doing all these great things. Basically they're in a dark place, and it's almost as if they're in the party's almost in its own death throes, so to speak, and it can't even recognize.
The Democratic brand at best, the strength of the Democratic brand is at best a delusion, joint delusion of very key people, key demographics in key places. So, your upper middle class elites in coast cities and in urban centers, your pundit class, your X, Y, and Z. And at worst, it's a Ponzi scheme, right? It's a Ponzi scheme. It thrives on convincing these people that there is strength in investing their time within the Democratic Party. There's strength in investing your time and money and, whatever other resources you have in this party, when functionally they've lost at every level. They have lost a record number of seats in state legislators under Obama. They've now lost the House, the Senate, the presidency, and they're going to lose the Supreme Court. They've lost most governorships. It's like and there seems to be this joint delusion. You're right, when you talk to Democratic people who support the Democrats, that the Democrats have won something. And this delusion seems to be based entirely on the fact that we had a black president and that you can't say the N-word on TV anymore. So, and the Democrats feed into this delusion by making everything about the culture war. Like they reduce every conversation back to identity politics and the culture war, because it's the only battle they've won in the past 30 or so years that has been a definitive victory. But people are tired of that.
Well, because they hang everything on demographics. For the last 8 years or so, with Obama's win and the Obama coalition, and the new influx of Hispanic voters and minority voters that came with him, they thought demographics is king. They stopped focusing on real economic policy issues. They kind of became Republican light on everything except for cultural issues and identity politics. And that's where they hung their hat. And, that's where they laid down and died in this election, because identity politics did not do the job, especially not with Hillary Clinton at the helm. It just wasn't working. She wasn't the right messenger. This wasn't the right time. This was the time for a strong populist economic message. They had none. They had the worst messenger for that message that you can imagine. And it failed them miserably. So unless they come together and really do a thorough autopsy I hate using that term, of this election, I think that they're just doomed to continue failing, especially if they keep relying on identity and demographics.
But here's my question, and it's for everyone here. Is it really an autopsy? Because frankly, people during the, I don't know what you call it, the massacre, what sort of word language you, during that, people were screaming their problems at them. No one was hiding. Like there was no shortage of people from various sources on the left, on Twitter, screaming that, hey, you can't do this. You shouldn't do this. This is a mistake. Stop doing it. You need a strong populist message. And to even use the language of, oh, well, now we need a post-mortem. Now we need an autopsy. Now we need to figure out where things went wrong. It's like, well, no, you don't, because we told you. You were being told throughout the entire process where things went wrong. So to pretend like this is one of a hindsight 2020 situation is kind of disingenuous.
It is to the people who run the party, because they obviously weren't listening. And when they did listen, they responded with insults and dismissing us and our concerns and calling us Bernie bros and all of that other nonsense. And they didn't listen. So they have this bubble echo chamber that they're all in. These very wealthy, elite Democratic Party leaders discussed these things amongst themselves and thought it was a really great idea to hit Trump on the size of his hands and his language and what the words he uses instead of his actual policy ideas and the horrendous things that he's going to do. And coming up with a good opposition to the meat and potatoes issues that people were really focused on this year. They just didn't bother paying attention.
I want to point out something, and year after year after year, the number one issue, usually, except for times of horrible war or conflict or something like that, where it's like people really feel under attack. The number one issue that people vote based on has been the economy. So I don't understand how, you don't have an economic message going into an election. If you look back in the 30s, there's polling data there that shows that Democrats got, 77% of the black vote because black people voted for a New Deal like program that was going to bring jobs and wealth. And even though they weren't included in the direct of spending for the New Deal, they actually benefited from a lot of the, tertiary effects of it, when it was implemented. So, that trend has actually gone, all the way through the Democratic Party. Like they've always voted for them, even though they were racist, even though they wouldn't sit in the same chair or use the same water fountain. They still voted for these people because they were voting based off of their economic interests. Well, even though these people were not always in favor of the civil rights era, they still were able to garner a large percentage of black votes based on just that alone. So this idea that, we have to vote based on identity politics and all that, it just doesn't hold the mustard, because there was a time when people understood that sometimes, it doesn't really matter what somebody thinks about you. It matters what they can do for you or what you can get them to do for you based on a political economy.
Well, I don't know. Okay, so I made this point to Ben a few days ago that I agree with everything you just said. That I don't know. I do know. They made a miscalculation. They made a miscalculation as to the importance of identity politics and getting people to vote, and they discounted all of the other factors that played into the sort of demographic war they were waging with Republicans for the past few decades. They assumed that people were voting for them because of this identity politics message, and they overplayed it. Like it's the same reason why, or rather, it's part of the same mentality that when you go back and they whitewash history to have Martin Luther King Jr. speeches sound more and more about some sort of amorphous notion of blackness and black equality in very, very vague ways, less about class equality, black equity into economic sector. It's this notion that people are really, really concerned with language when most people aren't. Most adults are not really that concerned with language, except for those people who exist in the highest economic strata of society, for whom language representation, those issues are really the only kind of oppression and prejudice that they are not insulated from due to their wealth. So it becomes very hard for them to understand how people don't vote based on these language games because they're trying to feed their kids. In the same way, it's hard for people to understand how, like, let's be honest, there was a big difference between Trump and Clinton. Clinton was the lesser of two evils, but the issue was that they miscalculated how much less evil she was, and whether or not the ways in which she was less evil made a difference to those who were voting, the majority of those who were voting. So you can talk about the way Trump wants to defund a whole bunch of, wants to defund the FDA, wants to defund the EPA, wants to defund the X agency. But let's be honest, the majority of Americans, when you can't feed your kids, they're not really worrying about whether the EPA has enough funding, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, just as you said, when it comes to the magnitude of differential, there really wasn't much distance in them. So yeah, Trump wants to defund the EPA, whereas Democrats just have it be very, very low functioning. It's like, if you're judging it based upon, some sort of bar, some sort of standard where you're saying this is adequate or that's not adequate. And it's not just about, being a lesser of two evils kind of deal. It's like, okay, we need adequate this or adequate that. They're both below the bar. So they're both inadequate. And the magnitude really doesn't matter because you're already in the inadequate area.
Yeah, so I'm of two minds.
I think they're there on a lot of issues.
Yeah, I'm of two minds about this. So I agree with what you said there, because we still live in a world where Flint, Michigan does not have clean drinking water. We still live in that world where there are over 200 oil spills every year, many of which go unreported up until the point in which it becomes a really, a big issue. At the same time, we also live in a world where most people, where a large portion of Americans make less than $50,000, $40,000 a year. And I would argue that if you're making less than $40,000 a year, you're probably not thinking of high level issues like the EPA. I would say being overly concerned with, this may seem, churlish, but being overly concerned with the funding of the EPA or having that be the issue you decide who to vote based on is a kind of a privileged position to be in.
And I agree with what you're saying, and I think part of their ignoring these kind of kitchen table issues is because of their elitism and what they're surrounded by every day, and the things that they have the luxury to be upset about. Things like language usage and kind of more, like you said, broader, more philosophical things. And I think everyone should have the opportunity to worry about those things, but we're not there yet. So, I think the problem that the Democrats have is they're constantly walking this very fine line because they want this broad, big tent. They know that their strength is in numbers, and they want as many people voting for them as they can, because that's how they've won. And the Republicans win when less people vote. The Democrats win when more people vote. That's just how it seems to go. But since the Clinton years, the Bill Clinton years, they've so been in the pocket of Wall Street. They've really become a very corporate party. They've thrown away labor unions. They've thrown away all of those economic New Deal, Roosevelt messaging that they had, and those kind of policy issues. They've thrown those away in favor of more centrist, incrementalist, even center right policy positions. So they don't want to draw too much attention to that. And I think that's just the line that they've been walking. And I think that that's why they focus so much on identity politics, is so that they can draw our attention away. And in addition to that, a real populist message would unite the far left and the far right and other people that normally wouldn't be united. And they don't want that either, because then their donors wouldn't be happy.
Well, I think you make a good point. And the Democrats walk a lot of very fine lines. And one of the issues that also comes up when we talk about lesser of two evils policy is that the Democrats largely define themselves by what the Republicans are not. And not having a proactive message really hurt Clinton in this campaign. Not having a good proactive message in terms of what she was going to do besides stop Trump it definitely hurt her. You enter this weird position where the Democrats are overly concerned with what the Republicans can do because it determines what they can get away with. So they kind of walk that really fine line of brushing up against of being evil, but just dialing it back a little bit. And I think with Clinton, you see them kind of crossing that line where it became almost impossible to tell who really was the more evil candidate. Like, who really was the most evil candidate, because they were relying so heavily on Donald Trump being incredibly evil and people being able to recognize it. But they created a series of material and economic circumstances in the United States where, for the majority of people, sorry, they couldn't tell a difference because they weren't concerned with these long-term things, like, which is a big issue. But let's be honest, for most people, if you can't feed your kids, worrying about climate change is not really is not very reasonable to assume.
Well, I can make an argument.
Well, yeah, I think we can all make.
Look here, though. Here's where the rubber hits the road, right? Let's say you are concerned about climate change, and that is your biggest issue. You don't have the numbers on climate change alone, and there are other people who have other issues. Perhaps you align with these individuals, and you all get your issues addressed. And you offer them what they need. They support you on what you need.
Well, now you're just talking crazy.
Coalition can be formed, right? And I find that a lot of groups have this problem where they're only concerned about their issue, and they won't make an alliance with somebody on another issue, and nobody gets anything. And it's just and then on top of that, after it's all said and done, you want to blame the people that had an issue that wasn't supported. You want to blame them for your loss. And it's just like, well, you have to build your coalition to be able to win election. That is the politician's job. And when you don't do that, that's not somebody else's fault. That's your fault. Well, now, you made a point where you said she campaigned wrong. I don't think there was anything that Hillary Clinton could say and or do that was going to win her this election. She was the wrong person to be up there running. Period.
That's true, but I mean, I would argue that if Hillary Clinton were a completely different person, personality-wise and charisma-wise, she probably could have pulled it off. Probably, in terms of, but this comes down to, I mean, but you're right though, right? So it's like every part of her was so problematic. It becomes hard to separate them out as like what the real problem was. Was it her obvious lack of empathy for the problem that she caused over the past 20 years? Was it the actual history of those problems? Was it that weird laugh that she does? What was the straw broke the camel's back?
Corruption. The corruption is clear. The clear corruption.
So I would say,
and then on top of that, Barack Obama, he just fooled people for 8 years. That's not going to happen again. Like, it's a lot harder to pull the same con. Like,
which is why
everybody's memory.
Which is why she was the exact wrong person to choose, because so many, especially progressives and people on the far left, are so disappointed in so many things that Obama has done, and so many of his tactics in dealing with the right wing. And everybody wants to blame the Tea Party for being so extreme, but like you were saying before, it gave the Democrats cover to go farther right, and that's exactly what they did. They went farther right, and people don't want to tolerate that anymore. If they're going to vote for a Democrat that has all Republican policies, they'll just vote for the Republican. And I don't understand how the Democrats haven't learned that lesson after the past few elections.
We keep focusing in things like learning a lesson. I don't think they're capable to change their ways. They're completely captured. They're completely captured. Okay. They're stuck where they are. They can't get any better.
I don't. Okay, so I agree with what you're saying, but I don't know if I agree with the language there, and I don't want to go but because it becomes hard to tell. I would make the argument that the people we rely on, your Nancy Pelosi, your Steny Hoyers, your Chuck Schumers, even if they could learn a lesson, could they properly implement it in a way that would allow them to keep power? And my answer would be no. It's like, because
that's what I'm saying. They're incapable.
Yeah, the only lesson to learn from here, the only lesson to take from the loss of Clinton, the queen of neoliberals, is that no one likes you, so please leave. And that's not a lesson that people learn in politics very well. People don't voluntarily cede power. People don't, regardless of what lessons can be gleaned from what occurred. Chuck Schumer is not going to voluntarily cede his power. I will say this though: Clinton practiced a very patronizing form of politics, insofar that she was very, if you're not with me, you're against me. Of where you stood on the spectrum. If you were too far to the left, you're against me. If you're on the right and you won't vote for me, you're against me. I know what's best for you. Like she basically went out there and made enemies of a lot of different sectors and groups in a way that you wouldn't expect someone running for a political party to demonize their base so heavily. If you wouldn't expect that.
So I'll agree with not being antagonistic towards your base. I think that's a huge problem. But I won't say that, that she necessarily made an enemy out of everybody who wasn't with her. I think she just had her positions and people are gonna fall where they may. I respect people who can stand on their principle, and if you have enemies that are not gonna go with you, F them. You gotta move on. You can only be you, right? But you need to better gauge exactly how big your coalition is, right? So if you have issues and you're standing here and you don't have what you need to gain power and maintain that power, you have to basically change your inputs. You need to change your policies in order to grow that coalition. And I just think Hillary Clinton and the neoliberalism brand right now, as it is utterly incapable of doing that because they're captured by the donor class. So
But that's the criticism of Hillary Clinton, that she lacks growth. For all of the information, all of the inputs that have been going into the system, our government, for the past 20, 25, 30 years regarding neoliberalism and all of its faults, they just don't learn anything from that stuff. They show no growth. They will profess to have learned something. Under the poor, of the minority, of the black, of the Latino, of the female, of all these various different identities. But when it comes to actually instituting structural changes, which as in neoliberalism and dismantling this sort of violent capitalism, they don't seem to they never get that far. They never get past the language.
And this went even farther than just their base. I mean, there was a phenomenon in this election that I had never seen before, and that was a constant barrage of insults to the voters, not the politicians, not the nominees, but the actual voters, the basket of deplorables, the Bernie bros, all of these derogatory terms that were used not only by pundits and regular people towards one another, but also from the candidates towards the voters. I'd never experienced anything like that before, and I think it was just such a colossal mistake for them to turn, because they are incapable, I guess, of learning those lessons, at least for the moment. I hope that's not permanent. I think once they start losing power in a significant way, personally, because politicians do know one thing, and that's self-preservation. Once they start actually losing their power, they might change their tune a little bit, but for now. But yeah, this phenomenon of insulting the voters is just beyond me, and I hope that was a one-time thing, and we don't see that again.
Well, I mean,
I don't think so. I think that's going to be an ongoing thing. I think liberalism now has become like, we're smart because we think this way, and if you agree with us, you're smarter than the rest, and everybody else is just living in what they call not the real world, and all these other things that people are trying to get are unworkable fantasy solutions. Oh, yeah. And this is being an adult because they're just children. You don't know what they're talking about.
Oh yeah, the denial of rationality amongst people who don't agree with you inherently is very big in the liberal sector. The smug liberal loves to claim everyone but them, and everyone who doesn't see the world like them is irrational and illogical, and succumbing to some kind of delusion. But I'm tired of talking about the Clinton versus Trump phenomenon. Trump won. Trump won. He's going to be our next president, and let's talk about where we go from here. Let's talk about the resistance. Let's talk about.
Oh no.
Let's talk about rebuilding the progressive movement, and less about whether or not Trump is going to be president, because spoiler alert, he is going to be president. Whether you call him president or not, he's going to be president of America. He is not going to coalesce the left into one unified party. That is not happening for a variety of reasons. But I do know one thing: the people who fail to prevent him from becoming president should not be allowed to lead the resistance.
Well, the resistance is now a term that's just forever ruined for me. I think I'll never be able to take it seriously again. If you'd seen the Keith Olbermann, the Resistance show on GQ, is it a show or just like a segment? I'm not really sure what it is exactly.
A series of rants.
Series of Glenn Beckish like rants on GQ, and his major point that he took out of his last video was that you have to resist a Trump presidency by not calling him president ever. And it's stuff like that. If you remember when Obama was elected and the Republicans did childish, ridiculous things like this, these little snipes at him and at his character, saying you lie and doing these unprecedented acts of disrespect, trying to think that that's going to get them somewhere. It was just it was foolish, and it made them look foolish and small and petty.
Because, I mean, at a certain point, and I think you make a really good point, Katie, at a certain point, what we're talking about is not, or rather are not, personality traits that are inherent to the left or the right, but personality traits that are inherent to people in that kind of bubble. In Keith Olbermann's The Resistance, this like abject denial of reality, this kind of desire to create complex paranoid delusions to reframe reality in a way that's more pleasant to you, that's just an entitlement complex. It's like that's just a narcissistic entitlement complex, and that's going to be one of the things we have to overcome as progressives. Like the face of the left is largely conservative on so many different issues.
Yeah, I'm before the show started, they pointed me to the Keith Olbermann moment where he just broke down and just started saying a whole bunch of crazy stuff. I couldn't make it through the whole thing. But one thing I want to point out to everybody is that we don't need to get stuck into a situation where, we start coming up with all these fantasies and delusions about why this happened and why that happened. Hillary Clinton lost. And for the most part, the left that was aligned with her needs to understand that nobody wants that. And that your coalition is not enough to win. So you must grow your coalition, not by trying to browbeat people with language, because no one cares, by actually giving real policy that's going to really actually help people. And that means that, hey, if somebody wants universal health care, not many people in the liberal coalition are supposedly against universal health care. They just say it's unworkable. Perhaps you need to actually fight for universal health care to grow your coalition so you can win office. And when you're in there, you need to actually do it. Or else in the midterm, you'll say, well, our people don't show up in the midterms. No, they do show up. They just don't vote for you because you didn't do anything with that time. And anybody that tries to, excuse the Obama administration for losing in 2010, when he came in, they had the supermajority. They could have did all this stuff lightning fast. Mm-hmm. Like the New Deal was passed in Roosevelt's first 100 days. The Supreme Court was striking down bills left and right, and he steamrolled them. That is how a real president does stuff. I don't know what this stuff is where Obama's so helpless. He's so helpless. He just can't do it all on his own. The Republicans obstructed him even though he had a supermajority.
Well, let's talk about that for a second. Sorry, before I do, Dave, can you mute your window, because we're getting a little bit of feedback from you in the Hangout, so we can hear it. We can hear ourselves talk. Yeah. So no, I mean, we can hear you. We can hear ourselves through you in the window. Distracting a little bit. Okay, thank you. But no, yeah. And let's pretend like that's a legitimate excuse. Let's pretend like that Obama really could not do anything. The Democrats really just have all these big progressive ideals that they want to pass. They have these bills that they're just waiting to pass. But every time they try to pass them, oh, shucks, those darn Republicans stop them. Okay, I have two issues with that. There has never been a Democratic push to expand us from a two-party system. They are perfectly comfortable sharing the stage with only Republicans, even with their obstructionism. And two, if you can't get the job done, I'm sorry, regardless of whatever is standing in your way, you've promised. I mean, that was part of your promise. You were going to get these things done. So if you can't get them done, if you can't find some way to get these things done, regardless of your excuse, I can't sit there and feel bad for you. We need better Democrats then, right? I mean, is that bad of me to say? Like, regardless of what the Republicans are doing, irrespective of what they do, if the Democrats we've elected to Congress cannot get things passed, if they can't get a new Voting Rights Act, if they can't get gun legislation, if they can't get a single payer, then they need to go, and we need to find someone who can do it.
I agree with that, but here's the problem with the critique I was laying out. Everybody will say Obama was so helpless. He's so helpless, but when Republicans get in there, they're not helpless. They get their stuff in. They get it in even when they're not in office. And what I'm saying is, how can Republicans be so successful, but Democrats are just so helpless and they can never do anything? And then after it's all said and done, these same Democrats that were so helpless and unable to achieve much, they're so great. They were the best president we've ever seen. They've done so much. This is a historic event. And I'm like, well, you didn't do anything. How can you be great without doing anything? How can you be great, but you're helpless? It's like, how do you keep those two narratives going at the same exact time? They directly contradict one another. Either you were great and you did a lot of stuff. You did exactly what you wanted to do, which was, maybe not what we expected you to do, or you were helpless and couldn't do anything. But at the same time, you're somehow great for that.
Well, again,
that doesn't make any sense.
I think the Democrats often use the obstructionism and the extremism, especially in the last 8 years of the Republican Party, as a cover. I really think that's the purpose it serves, and I think they're more than happy to have that cover because they don't want to do those things. That would be going against all of their donors and their Wall Street backers. And this isn't like conspiracy talk. I mean, these people are funded by Goldman Sachs. And you look at Joe Manchin, his daughter is in the pharmaceutical industry. I mean, you have these people, the Democrats in power, that have all of these ties to corporate America and the very ultra wealthy and the real reigns of power. And they don't want to go against that because it's about self-preservation, and the intransigence of the Republicans, especially in the last 8 years, have given them the perfect cover for that. So I don't think they want that to end.
But I think at a certain point,
I agree with that.
I'm sorry. I think at a certain point, we're talking less about the Democrats in Congress themselves, but your rank and file everyday people who describe themselves as Democrats. Correct me if I'm wrong, Nick, and ascribe this great legacy to President Obama, ascribe this great legacy to all these Democrats in Congress. But when you confront them on what they've actually done and what they've allowed to be done under their watch, they sort of have a large amount, all these excuses for why the Democrats are still great. They're still morally on the side of good. The Republicans are still morally on the side of evil, even though they haven't really done anything. In a lot of cases, even though they supported things that would normally be thought of as bad. And so it's this tendency of people on the left, especially your upper middle class elite liberals, your smug liberals, to just work backwards, work from the position that all Democrats are good no matter what they do, and then try to square that circle through cognitive dissonance by saying, okay, well, Obama did all those drone strikes and he killed people without due process and all these things, but he only did that because of X, Y, and Z. They have all these excuses and they have all these reasons for why, regardless of individuals' actions, they are still inherently good. And a lot of this has to do with what they want to believe about themselves. People are always looking for an excuse for why, irrespective of their actions, they are in the right. Maybe I'm just being cynical, but part of this talk is, part of this is understanding that if we're going to have a resistance to Trump, it needs to be a measured one. We can't simply resist everything that Trump does or everything Republicans do simply because they have an R by their name, just like we can't support everything that Obama did or look fondly back on it or support everything any Democrat does simply because they have a D by their name. And anyone who was not going to protest the election, anyone who was not going to call for faithless electors, irrespective of who won, I lose a little bit of respect for them because this election was tainted from the beginning. There was so much taint in this election, and people are sort of cherry picking what they find to be most problematic when we have evidence of the DNC tipping the scale for Clinton from the beginning. We have this myriad of democratic incompetence and greed and corruption that leads one to believe, well, are they really so different from the Republicans? But everyone is making excuses for them that are not connected with the reality situation.
Yeah, I just want to point out that, like, you know, a lot of apologists are out there making the arguments that I just made, and most of the arguments that they're making, they either fly in the face of reality, they fly in the face of history, and then on top of that, they'll contradict one another. So it's just like, basically, you know, we said that sometimes, you know, some of this stuff is a little bit higher level, more abstract, and sort of removed from the real world. You know, we're in a place now where they're living in a complete illusion that's separated from the real world. You know, the illusion that of greatness, the illusion that they're doing these great things, and in reality, they're not doing anything at all. You know, Barack Obama's presidency has not been great. It has not been very good at all. And you know, let's even look at the Bush administration. Bush administration comes in and does terrible things, and while Bush is doing them, they're all horrible. Barack Obama continues 80% of what Bush did and makes a lot of it worse. Oh, you know, he's so helpless. This is a historically great president. You know, he's done many things. You know, we love his style and his cool and his grace. He would go down as one of the greatest presidents that ever lived. I'm like, no, you actually have to do stuff to be president, and you have to deliver for your base. And Barack Obama has failed on both accounts.
But unfortunately, I mean, that's how Republican behavior becomes normalized. That's how the Overton window shifts. The Republicans start it sometimes, then Democrats continue it, and then by the time the Republicans come back and do it again, it's already, you know, it becomes impossible to critique it. How are we going to critique President Trump's drone policy if it's essentially just the same as the President Obama's?
Which is what some of us have been screaming at the top of our lungs for years. You know, you will lose the presidency eventually. You got to keep that in mind when you go through and extend all of these powers to the executive.
Absolutely. So we're talking about how we can stop behavior from being normalized, how we as progressives can stop this dangerous behavior from becoming normalized simply by, and this comes down to what we were talking about with a Trump presidency somehow causing the left to solidify into one big progressive bloc. That's not going to happen. Like I didn't believe it back when Jimmy Dore was saying it, and I don't believe it now. And I think that what we've seen in the past month or so has bared that to be true, because now we have progressives who are still, even after the awful, embarrassing, unseemly, degrading failure of the neoliberal wing of the Democratic Party losing. The Democratic, they are still going full bore. They just reelected Nancy Pelosi. They just appointed Chuck Schumer to be head of, the minority leader. And now there's this, you know, Keith Ellison, like, who is arguably a good thing, you know, for progressives. Like, they're trying to smear him. He is not even conservative enough for the neoliberal wing of the Democratic Party. And so we have this new scenario where instead of Trump coalescing the left into one big progressive bloc under leadership of Bernie Sanders, we have progressives still being forced to fight a war on two fronts, one versus the Democratic establishment, the neoliberals, and one versus the Republicans, because neither party, or rather neither of these two groups, like the progressives, because their ascendancy to power means bad things for everyone else. I mean, like, not bad things, but it means that getting off the corporate teat.
Yeah, well, look. You know, I've always made this argument that, you know, there is no answer to the right while the neoliberals exist as the force on the left. So that is where the focus should be. And you can say you can fight both. No, you can't. That you've been trying to fight both forever and a day and you haven't gone anywhere. The neoliberalism has to be called. It just does. And that's going to start with us being able to just say, that's it, walk away. The Democrats, if you're not going to do this, we're walking away. We're gone. If it means going to the Green Party, if it means going to a progressive independent party, if it means being outside the parties, we just don't need to be there. And if Republicans win in that space, that's fine, because we're building something to counter them after the neoliberals are gone.
At this point, I think that we have to start saying the Democratic Party might be a lost cause. I think at this point we have to start saying with even before Keith Ellison came out and kind of went full bore for, you know, neoliberal establishment with his support of, I want to say what, Biddle was the name in Florida, that the Democratic Party, either due to enforced ignorance or so the argument is that you just can't do this stuff without corporate money. I don't know it to be true. But regardless of whether the infrastructure of the Democratic Party requires you to have corporate money, or if just the social environment of the Democratic Party makes you believe that that's an actual, valid concern, it's irrelevant. Because with corporate, we have shown that corporate money is just anathema to the progressive cause.
But a lot of people don't feel that way. When I make that argument, are we okay? Are we okay with?
You can feel however they want, but it's just the truth. You can
But they'll tell me
I'm being flippant.
Okay, so they'll tell me that, hey, asking for a candidate that doesn't take the corporate money, that's just purity. You're not going to find that, and we should just accept what's here. And what I'm saying is, under that logic, you might as well have voted for Hillary Clinton and been glad for it, because that's what's there. If you are really willing to accept corporate money, you might as well vote for Hillary Clinton. I mean, maybe you could say, well, she's a far cry too far. She's a little bit too far out for me. Okay, so I'll go with someone who's a little bit less, maybe a little bit friendlier to my cause, like Keith Ellison. But what I want to know is, when the power structure leans on Keith Ellison, what do you think he's going to do? When the purse strings, are threatened to be taken away from Keith Ellison, is he going to stand up for you, or is he going to stand up for whoever's paying him? And as long as he's taking that corporate money, it's always going to be a question. I believe the question is, he's going to fold. Well, I believe Bernie Sanders would
That's
fold.
all true. I don't agree that Bernie Sanders would fold, and not just because I'm like a crazy fanatic, but he has never done that in the past.
He endorsed Hillary Clinton. I think that was folding enough.
I don't. I disagree with that, and I also disagree that it's all about actual money changing. It is for the politicians, but as far as us giving up on the Democratic Party, I don't necessarily agree that they're a lost cause. It's about the, as you saw with the insurgent candidacy of Bernie Sanders, it's not about how much money you have, but it is about how much.
Well, he had quite a bit of money.
Yeah, he did, but it was exactly. So he had all the money, he had all of the years in politics and the experience, but the media didn't cover him. He was from the start, they just, Hillary Clinton had a 30-year head start on him as far as name recognition and media coverage. And there was, especially with the near blackout on his candidacy for the first, 6 or 7 months, I think really until he won Michigan, basically no one covered him. And that really hurt him. And that wasn't about just how much money he had or was earning. It was about how the connections he had and how the corridors of power are arranged in DC and how the establishment functions.
But the expression, the things that sort of tie all those things together has to do with money and power. That's what those things are. And what I'm talking about, I'm not saying that, it's just money. I'm talking about when the power structure leans in, whatever it's going to be, whatever method of control they have, whatever method of influence they have, whether it's saying, I'm going to drop $1 million in your opponent's campaign, we're going to sink you, and you're going to take away your committeeships. We're going to you're going to be sidelined in the party, or you'll be removed from the party. Whatever it is that they have, when they bring that force to bear, we need people that are going to stand up and just say, do what you're going to do, because I'm going to go to the people and we're going to get you out of there. We need those people. Bernie Sanders, as much as you might be a fan of him, he's shown that when push comes to shove, when they threaten to take away his committeeship, when they threaten to do all these things, whatever they threatened him with, he folded.
I don't consider that folding when it comes to him having access and the power to help people. Those committeeships allow him to do things that help people.
They'll always jingle something. It's
that's true.
Okay, well, look.
Okay, so the question becomes less is it a lost cause? Well, rather, is it worth the trouble? And by that I mean, I think that people are attracted to the infrastructure the Democratic Party has in place already, but that infrastructure, is incredibly problematic, as we've seen, because as Nick points out, a lot of the infrastructure is built on corporate money, and there is at least the culture within the Democratic Party at the DNC level, at the national level, that if you don't play ball with corporate interests, either you won't win or you can't win. And so
and it's not just the national level,
but
it's all levels.
But that's a relatively recent phenomenon, if you think about it. Since the DLC and the Bill Clinton years, that's when the Democrats really took that kind of corporate turn. I don't think that that's something that can't be undone. I think that if we somehow got the money out of the system, or began to, which I think Obama like kind of half-assed started, with not allowing corporate money into the DNC, which they actually overturned recently, which is a mistake. But I think that if there's a way that we could get our foot in the door with that, I don't think that it's something that we can't come back from within the Democratic
it's
Party.
interesting, that study that pointed out that the United States is really an oligarchy, not a democracy, has shown even far and before the Reagan Revolution and before the DLC that the political system had already been dominated by moneyed interests for a very, very long time. I think, the times where you see people get stuff is when, there's moneyed interest behind those things that agrees to give them to us. And I think that study kind of shows that chronicle further back than just the DLC or even the Reagan Revolution. That's been at play in America for a very long time.
Well, yeah, but before the DLC, it was the unions, which was assumedly people, that gave Democrats most of their money. So who are they responsive to for a lot of years? The working people, and they turned away from that in more recent time.
I think that's a fair point, but the question becomes, like, even if this is a recent phenomenon, even if this had just happened in the past 3 or 4 years, with the amount of power that money affords people, with that amount of power, can you work within that system? Can you work within a system that equates money to free speech, and where the notion that not taking corporate money is akin to losing or somehow being unworth? The inability to fundraise corporate money or pull in these billion-dollar campaigns. Can you use money? Can you use corporate money to get corporate money out of politics, or is that just that's just wishful thinking? Can you take money from the billionaire class to essentially close with the intention of essentially closing them out of the system that way? And I don't know if you can do that.
That would be very difficult to do. Yeah.
So I mean, the question becomes: if the Democratic Party, as it exists now, has accepted that mentality that you have to have corporate money to be a viable candidate, you have to be amenable to taking corporate money, you have to be amenable to corporate interest to get that money. Is there any hope within that system, within a party that believes that to its core? I mean, maybe not at its very, very, very foundations, but as it stands now, the leadership believes that corporate money is not something that is on the table for debate on whether it's useful. Like, there is no debate to be had over whether it's useful or rather whether it's worth it. It's simply a necessity because you have to compete.
But that's the key. The leadership thinks that way. I think a majority of the everyday left, I don't know, the independents and the left and the regular Democratic people who consider themselves part of that party don't think that way.
I would argue that basically whatever the leadership's line is, your team players are always going to agree with the leadership line or go along with it. So, you're really talking about the people that really object to the corporate money are very small in number, not enough to really say that, that the majority is against it and they're willing to say, no, we're not going to vote for you if you're taking that money. That's not the majority position. That's definitely a small position. And in the coalition.
And absolutely. And if you express that position, as Nick has said, you're treated as though you're crazy and unreasonable. Like, if you express the position, and I think we can all agree that Bernie Sanders, regardless of where he stood at the end, showed that with small donations, you can make a real run for president. And, but for media blackouts, but for the fact that we have telecommunications monopolies, he might have done better. He might have won. Hell, some people swear to God that he won and it was just the DNC actually effectively rigging the election. I don't want to get into that, but I think that we can say there would have been a different showing had the media been, giving fair and equitable time to every candidate.
Why should they, though? The media is privately owned. They can do what they want to do.
Exactly.
That's another issue too, that you have private ownership of the thoughts, of the hearts and minds of many individuals. And when I say that, I hate to say like I hate to say like they control people's thoughts. It makes it sounds like a weird thing, but just what you're exposed to does have an impact. It's our thoughts you rely on a lot of feedback from the outside world, and when that feedback is being controlled by somebody, there is a lot of influence there.
Yeah. So I mean, but okay. So we talk about. So you mentioned that the media is privately owned, but at the same time, so is the DNC. DNC is not not really public the way people think it is. The DNC is also kind of a corporation. Like they are beholden to their own they're beholden to the standards they set for themselves, but they are not a part of our government in the same way Congress is a part of our government. They're not a part of our government in the same way the FBI is a part of our government. But the issue with both the DNC and with the media is this illusion of fairness, this illusion that they straddle that line between private interest and public interest, the private interest in the public good. And so the issue becomes here with effectively the media censored Bernie Sanders. Like effectively the media engaged in a form of censorship, which is a form of propaganda to gaslight the public into believing that there was only one viable candidate on the Democratic side. And when you combine that with the sort of generally accepted perception, or I mean, at least probably used to be generally accepted perception, that the media is fair and unbiased, although I don't know who believes that, you get this effect that it really did drag Bernie Sanders down. Which, I mean, so I can't criticize the private company for doing what they feel is best for their private interest. I can only point out that it is a private company that people perceive as working towards the public good, and it was not doing that.
I want to interject really quickly and just let you know, I had to look it up because it didn't sound right to me. 78% of Americans polled want Citizens United overturned and want money out of politics. So it is a huge issue to regular people on both sides of the aisle.
Yeah. What I was saying is none of them are willing to not vote for a politician because that politician takes corporate money. I was saying that the position is we're going to get it out by force. And if that means we're not going to support our politician because they're taking the money, then that's the line we're going to draw. And not enough people are there.
I think that
they may feel like Citizens United. First off, Citizens United is not the thing that actually removed the aggregate limit.
It's true, but it's a symbol.
So it was McCutcheon. I think it's McCutcheon.
McCutcheon, yeah.
McCutcheon. I said it wrong, but that's the real case.
Vallejo?
Yeah, I can't remember the rest of it, but I know it was McCutcheon. That's the case that really needs to be looked at. But regardless, like, we have to get to the point where the people are militant in what they demand and know how to get it.
But I think that has to do with the candidates too, and the choices that people think that they have, or a lot of people don't know. A lot of Congress people get voted in just because they've been in office before. They have the incumbency is like an 89% rate of being reelected if you're an incumbent. It's ridiculous, and it's all because people don't know their options, or there aren't very good options. I think that is something that could definitely change.
Yeah, but again, it has to come down to internally, like how are we thinking? How are we perceiving? How do I achieve my goals in the political arena? And I feel like people feel like, well, I can achieve my goals by voting for a candidate that is against my goals. And that is a big problem.
Well, I think a large part of that, and I think a large part of that is maybe only present on the left in certain situations. And I think that's because the moderate to center left does its best to cajole the far left. We've talked about this before, that the people who are, only slightly to the left, your neoliberal Democrats, your blue dog Democrats, and even your centrist Democrats, I don't want to say get off on, but yeah, they get off on their little sister soldier moments. They get off on their demonization of the far left almost as much as they get off on their demonization of the far right, because they think demonizing the far left and the far right equally makes them seem more reasonable. It's this whole desire to be the adult in the room. I think Democrats more than Republicans in this, this sort of smug liberalism, they love to appear as though they are the adult in the room. And they equate a lot of things with being mature and reasonable and adultish, and that's not a word. Whatever. Aged. They equate a lot of things with being the adult that aren't necessarily synonymous with that. I would say a lot of the the inability to fight, which they describe as being adult, is just cowardice.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing adult about not fighting for what you want and being what's the word I'm looking for? Compromising before you even ask to compromise. There's nothing adult about that. There's nothing childish about drawing a line in the sand and saying, if you cross this line, I can't cross it with you. That's not childish. That's simply having, standards. You can call it being a purist if you want, but I think everyone in their life has these red lines, and I think that what's childish is to sort of delegitimize anyone else's hard limits, to borrow a term from the BDSM community or whatever, and privilege your own and say, well, my hard limits are logical and reasonable, and your hard limits are you being childish. So the Democratic Party at the establishment level does not do its best to appreciate those on the far left, and I wouldn't consider they do what they did to Bernie. They smear him for being unreasonable and pie in the sky, or they smear him for not being as familiar with identity politics and the language of progressivism as they are, even if his ideas are structurally sound. And I would say that people who are, it's like Harry Belafonte said back in 2005, and we should really as progressives, we should pay heed to this, that people who are overly familiar with the language of progressivism, people who are overly concerned with the language of the movement, whether it be the civil rights movement or feminism, they need to be watched very carefully. Sometimes they need to be watched more carefully than people who keep making missteps, because that kind of attention being paid to rhetoric often means they are trying to obscure something else. And that might be the cynic in me, but I think that it more often than not, when we look at the media, we see it to be the case that these people who know all the language of intersectionality, they know all the language of being politically correct, they know all of the buzzwords, but their policies are so problematic and their outlook is so problematic and the way they live their lives are so problematic. Yeah, they won't call you the N-word, but they are far from reasonable in policy.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that, whenever I talk about knowing what you want to achieve and thinking about how do you get it, this involves being critical. If you really believe in universal health care, you should not be voting for a candidate that says universal health care is not going to happen. If you're voting for that candidate as a means of somehow getting universal health care, you're fighting against yourself. And I'm just asking everybody to just be critical. If you want to advance demilitarization of the police, you shouldn't be voting for any candidate that's providing federal funds for the police to buy military gear.
I think more than being critical, although I do agree I do agree that we need more critical thinkers on the left, because God knows when you saw people chanting for USA at General, oh my gosh, I forgot who spoke at the DNC this year. General
I don't recall his name.
Whatever.
I don't know.
It was
the general.
When the general spoke at the DNC, and there was chants of no more war, and the sort of Hillary coalition chanted USA, USA. I think that we saw that the ideals of the left are largely amorphous. Like they're largely determined by whoever is leading the party. So yeah, I want people to be more critically thinking, because the Democratic Party, it does not own the license on critical thinking. But I also want people to be more confident in their own politics. I want people to go out there and believe in their radical leftist politics, and don't be so insecure about the fact that everyone around you does not believe what you believe, and don't negotiate yourself down before you get to the bargaining table.
And I think that you can't have anything that's sacred in politics. You can't have anything that's off limits in politics. You can't hold anything up for sentimental reasons and not question it or fight it because it's tradition or it's just the way it's always been done, and just capitulate without question. I think that that's a huge problem the Democrats have, and the Republicans too, actually.
Yeah. All right. Well, I just want to make the point. I agree with most of what's said here. I tend to throw people. I basically put them to the test. I'm like, if you're really about these ideas, we'll see how far you can go. But what I want to know is when they lean in on you, when they try to force you to do something that's against your supporters, that's against the people that are behind you, what are you going to do? Are you going to stand up for those people, or are you just going to bow down to power?
I just want a level of ignorance on the left that we see in the Tea Party and the right. That sort of blind zealotry.
It's not ignorance.
I mean, to a certain extent, it's zealotry. It's a little bit. It's a little bit of.
They want what they want, and they know how to get it.
Yeah, they want what they
might be wrong, but they know how to get it, and we just have to connect the dots.
There's no right and wrong in politics. It's like love. There's no right and wrong in politics. There's only can I get what I want?
Yeah. I mean, that's the bottom line. Taking the morality out of it. Like, they want what they want and they know how to get it. And we need to start knowing how to get it, basically. I don't want to see any more Tom Hartmans talking about, I want the New Deal, but you're voting for somebody that's 100% against half of the New Deal. That's not how you get there.
You can, hell, I'm less extreme than you. You can say, hey, hey, I want the New Deal, but I'm going to vote for Hillary Clinton. Sure. Okay. Fine, do that. Be that person. But don't be that person who says, I want the New Deal. I'm going to vote for Hillary Clinton. But you people over there who's working towards the New Deal, you're insane. Like, you're crazy. It's like, how dare you not do what I'm doing? Because ultimately, you need to have the sort of wherewithal to say, okay, well, I know how far I'm willing to go, and I'm not willing to go as far as they are. But I respect the fact that there are people out there who will go further than me, because we need them to balance out the zealotry on the right. But we are running out of time, folks.
I was gonna say, okay, and let's say they do that, right? Realize that neither of y'all are gonna get anything unless you guys both come together, and you don't have to give up anything to join with the far left, but the far left has to give up quite a bit to come to the center right.
It's not just about joining with them. There can be coalitions made between the center left and the far left. There can be coalitions made between the center.
I mean aligning.
Okay, so, but I mean, I think
with them for coming.
But there can be but I think what we saw, and it's the point that Katie made, what we saw was a depreciation and a demonization of the far left. When really you can just say, well, they're a little bit further left than I am, but I respect the fact that we need people in this conversation who believe what they believe, because it balances out the people on the far right who believe what they believe. And those people on the far right are more problematic to me. I don't understand how we get to the position where people on the far left are more problematic than people on the right. I don't know how we get to a position where Bernie supporters are more problematic than Trump supporters, or more problematic than John Kasich supporters, or more problematic than than David Duke, because that's what we see now. We see people equating Rainier Colic to a white nationalist. And it's like, are you serious? It's like, I think you should always turn to the far left before you turn to the moderate right. I mean the center and far right. But you saw that Hillary Clinton. You saw a denial of her base to turn to the center right, which only crippled you. So I mean, it's less about aligning with or having shared or one has to go to the other. It's more about, okay, I appreciate you for who you are, and we need you in this conversation, and I respect some of your viewpoints, and the ones I don't, we can talk about, but I will come to you before I go to them.
Yeah, but here's the thing.
But sorry, just let me finish up that statement, because when we talk about the ideology of a party, when we talk about the ideology of any group, we talk about the ideology of any organization or corporation or whatever, you cannot determine ideology by what people say they believe in. You can't determine ideology by what people profess to believe in, what they put in their platform, what they put in their speeches, what they put in X, Y, and Z. You can only determine the ideology of a group by who they allow in and who they kick out. It's like those. That's how you determine the ideology of a group. You say, okay, well, whose voices are being silenced, who is being kicked out of the group, and whose voices are being elevated, and who is being allowed into the group. And we look at the Democratic Party of the past 2 months, 3 months, 4 months since the DNC, what you see is that the Democratic Party kicked out progressives and they let in Republicans.
And I think I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I just want to go in real quick. I think that's because the far left is more threatening to them than the center right. The center right shares more of their donors, shares more of their core values and economic issues and the things that they want to accomplish in that regard. And I think the far left progressive wing, the Bernie Sanders wing, the Rainier Calics, those are the people that are really threatening to their power, because I think that there is an opportunity to take over the Democratic Party with a more left turn, with more progressive ideals. And I think that's really threatening to them.
Absolutely. And I would have to say that even in the aftermath of everything that's happened, even in Trump becoming the president of the United States, I would say the Democratic establishment, the neoliberals, they made an intelligent choice. I think that there is more wiggle room for them in a Trump presidency because they can kind of manipulate their way out of that than there would have been in Bernie Sanders becoming the face of the Democratic Party.
Absolutely.
I think that both outcomes are problematic, but if they had to choose one, they chose the right one. They chose the one that is least dangerous to the power structure they believe in. So I mean, for all of the Clinton supporters, or not the Clinton supporters, but the crying amongst the Democratic establishment about Trump winning, that he was only their second worst outcome. Their first worst outcome was Bernie winning. It was Bernie winning and Bernie breaking up the telecommunications industry, and so MSNBC losing a lot of their funding or a lot of their money. It was him winning and getting money out of politics. It was him winning and doing all of these things to destabilize neoliberalism, because Trump is not going to do that. Trump is not. And so for the people who enriched themselves in the Democratic Party, Trump is not a threat to them. Trump is not a threat to Neera Tanden or John Podesta or Matthew Iglesias or any of the people who make their money as pundits or critics of politics. Trump is not a threat to the Democratic or liberal establishment. He's not even really a threat to those people who are not, those people who are, in the streets protest. A lot of people are in the streets protesting and crying about him. The people who Trump is a threat to were also threatened by the policies of Hillary Clinton. And so okay. Sorry. Sorry. We went a little bit long tonight. I apologize. We were just filling in for Ben, but I got a little passionate in case you couldn't tell. Thank you all for joining us. My name is Brandon Sutton. I've been joined by the indomitable Nicholas Nowlin and the dubiously named Katie Gerhold, if I'm pronouncing that right.
That's right.
So both of you guys, 30 seconds to close up. Not 30 minutes. Please don't take 30 minutes. 30 seconds to close up. Tell people what you're doing with your life, where you're going, why you're not married yet. Your mother's really disappointed in both of you.
That's true.
So yeah. So tell people how they can catch up with you, and then I'll close it out.
My name is Katie Gerhold. You can follow me at Katie Gerhold on Twitter. I also host the Planet Progressive podcast on Podbean, and so take a listen to that. It's relatively new, so I'm just getting started, but I'd love some more listeners. So, and as we said earlier, I will be co-hosting a panel show on the Progressive Army channel, hopefully January 2017, tentatively called The Reason We Drink, or Why We Drink. So make sure to keep a lookout for that.
All right, guys, I'm Nick, host of the Takedown with Nick, Subverting Power, a Radical Thought. We will be doing our same old every first Monday of the month. I think this month I'm probably going to try to squeeze in an episode here the day after Christmas. Yeah, Monday I might try to squeeze in an episode. We'll see about that. We're not sure. But you can find me at the Takedown Nick. And I think Andre, Subverting Power, he's also tweeting a lot of stuff. So we pay attention to both of those.
Well, my name is Brandon Sutton. You can find me on Twitter at Pretty Bad Lefty. I am usually the host of Project Sanity, and you can find both of these lovely people on that show whenever I can find them and bully them into joining me. It's been wonderful having this conversation with you guys all. Thank you and have a good night. Oh, and thanks to Ben for giving us this platform to express our problematic views. So like, subscribe, comment. I don't know how many of you are watching on Facebook, but if you're watching on Facebook, come over to the channel and like and subscribe there too. Please don't be mean to us on internet because we're all very sensitive. Have a good night. Oh, and thank you, David, for producing for us. You're so sweet. Night.
The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog, join the Progressive Army, and support The Benjamin Dixon Show. It's Ben Dixon! If you like this episode, be sure to share, like, and subscribe.
Consider becoming a Patreon. Go to www.patreon.com/The BPD Show and support The Benjamin Dixon Show.